I'd need to do is to rock up to the Parler website and just get it from there for free. And even this Patreon app store itself, we can see from these celebrity endorsement videos what the interface looks like. And that's enough to all but confirm that all this store is a rebadged version of an already existing free app. And if you are enjoying this video, then a sub to the channel would be invaluable. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Oh yeah, and let's talk about these celebrity endorsement videos actually. Because as soon as this phone was announced, we saw a whole load of high-profile people drop videos that basically said, this is the best thing since sliced bread. We had Candace Owens, who's an American author, who said,
Freedom phone. Literally, I'm holding a phone that is not controlled by Apple Google. I think this is like the most amazing thing ever.
Yes, Candace. So am I.
You need to get this phone.
I don't know, Candace. Need is a pretty strong word. I need food. I need water. I probably don't need an unknown spec $500 notched rip-off phone. And clearly neither do you. This girl spent a good minute talking about how easy it is to switch her SIM over and how it's the first thing she did from her iPhone, and yet her tweets after this video are still coming from an iPhone. Oh yeah, and how could I forget?
You can get 10% off by using just my first name, Candace. If you use the code Candace, if you use the code Candace at checkout.
There are plenty more of these endorsement videos, but probably the funniest one is from a girl called Anna Kate. It's literally 30 minutes of pure gold. I kind of wish I could show you the whole thing, but I'll settle for highlights. For starters, she has no idea what it is.
It's an Android? I don't think it's an Android. Is it an Android? I'm not really sure.
Well said.
There is no face recognition, which I love.
What's next? It doesn't make calls, which I love. Face recognition is a useful feature. If you don't like it, you can always turn it off.
So I like that it very much reminds me of an Apple phone.
Пишите код. Tab9 ускоряет процесс написания кода. С помощью искусственного интеллекта Tab9.
It's an Android. Oh, yeah, and don't forget...
If you want to get it, use code KATE. You'll get 10% off.
It doesn't take long to figure out why these people are involved. Turns out the Freedom Phone company has set up an affiliate scheme that pays promoters $50 per sale. Which means that, let's say I made a video telling you to drop what you're doing right now and buy it, and let's say 20,000 of you actually went through and placed an order, that would be $1 million. But this is the worst bit. So far all we've gathered is that all the phone's main selling points aren't really selling points, but this is where it goes from bad product to scam. See, this is an America First phone, right? This thing's entire angle is that your data is yours, get away from spyware, etc. Even the logo is based on a US flag, except it's actually built by a small phone company in China. The one country that Donald Trump, who's almost like the supposed inspiration for this phone, accused of spying. The guy even went as far as to completely ban Chinese Huawei for this exact reason. Finman's justification was that, well, it's impossible to build a phone top to bottom in the US right now, citing the fact that Motorola struggled with this exact same thing. Hey, maybe that would be an issue if, you actually built this phone yourself. But it gets worse. In an interview with Daily Beast, he let loose that the company he was working with was in fact Unidigi.
Я понял, здравствуйте. Переделан, перевить, да, ладно, переделан. Думаешь, они проходят? Нет? Ну, понял, все. Ну, это хорошо же, это круто. Это значит, мы свободные все люди, да? Если ты наложил телефон, то эй, ну, это подарки родился, как человек на дороге.
Не выходит так, понимаешь? Или выходит не так. Теперь знаешь. Да.
Shockingly low cost, and hey, maybe that would be an issue if, you actually built this phone yourself. But it gets worse. In an interview with Daily Beast, he let loose that the company he was working with was in fact UmiDigi, known for their shockingly low cost and absolutely not their reputation for security. Oh, and would you look at that? UmiDigi already has a phone that looks exactly like yours, the A9 Pro. The notch is the same, the buttons are the same, the camera layout exactly the same. These are not two different phones. So what you actually mean when you say you worked with UmiDigi is these are in Pro. UmiDigi already has a phone that looks exactly like yours, the A9 Pro. The notch is the same, the buttons are the same, the camera layout exactly the same. These are not two different phones. So what you actually mean when you say you worked with UmiDigi is that you went onto Alibaba and you ordered 1,000 phones for $100 each. I mean, by this logic, Tim Cook and I are best friends because I've been ordering his iPhones for the last 5 years. Just to give you some perspective here, while a company like Samsung might make 20% profit per phone, Xiaomi might make 10% or maybe even 5%, this guy is out here trying to make a 500 perspective here. While a company like Samsung might make 20% profit per phone, Xiaomi might make 10% or maybe even 5%, this guy is out here trying to make a 500% markup by only adding features that you can already get for free. Finman has tried to justify this $500 price tag by saying the phone features customized hardware and improved memory, but we know what that really means. He's gone onto the store, clicked this button, and then clicked this button. But what makes it even funnier is the fact that the UmiDigi A9 Pro is not even one of the company's current models. It's a phone from 2020, and the chipset inside of it, the MediaTek Helio P60, has been known to be vulnerable to authentication bypass attacks. This isn't the product of someone who actually cares about privacy, it's the product of someone who's trying to take advantage of people who aren't as tech savvy, and who just don't realize that A, the hardware inside is incredibly cheap, and B, that they can get all of these apps that are on here for free anyways. It's tricking people into thinking they're buying a US-centric device, when actually they might as well have just imported a phone from China and used all the extra money to feed their family for a month. On the subject of dodgy online happenings, this is Dashlane, an app whose entire goal is to make the internet easier. So you've probably been told at some point that the internet is a dangerous place, that you're constantly at risk of being hacked, and that you should make each of your account passwords not just different, but also complex enough that they end up looking like this. But who's going to remember them? That's what Dashlane's for. You can either use your fingerprint or your Face ID, and Dashlane will then be able to instantly autofill all your details onto any site. And compared to using something like Google Chrome's default autofill software, one, it's faster, because it works no matter which device you're using. I could be autofilling on Google Chrome on my Mac, but then pick up my iPhone, open Safari, and still have the same details ready to go. And two, it's safer, because instead of just remembering a password that you typed in, Dashlane can auto-generate the best passwords for you. So you can have every single one of your accounts completely locked down, but at the same time, the only thing you'll ever need to access them is you. If that sounds helpful, then you can actually try Dashlane for free on your first device by just going to dashlane.com/boss. And if you go through that link and then decide that you want to upgrade for premium, you can get that for 50% off using the code BOSS. To see the biggest nightmare tech fails, click here, or to see what I want Apple to change on the next iPhone, click here. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Use the Boss. I'll catch you in the next one.
Thank you.
Okay, this is the Vivo X60 Pro Plus.
Смотри, я плохо питаюсь, как бы, без белка вот там и так далее. Просто, да, это я как бы не, ну да, понимаю. То есть ничего особенного, на себя так как говорится. Ну, если это можно так назвать, то может и так. Ну ладно, это да.
And it's the most camera that I think a phone has ever been. This is a sponsored video, so it's not a review, but it just does a lot of interesting things. So, these are my top 10. Side note, it's almost sad that I have to say this, but in 2021, it is a feature for a flagship phone to come with everything in the box. Charger, case, USB-C cable, and a pair of earphones. So, number 10. This phone is fast. Snapdragon 888, 12 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM, 256 gigs of UFS 3.1 storage by default. And if you're someone who keeps an eye on benchmarks, this is right next to the ROG Phone 5 as the highest score I've ever recorded. But every flagship phone in 2021 is fast. What makes this interesting is that it's got that ultra performance, it's got the ultra camera, but it's not exactly ultra in dimensions. Most companies with their maxed out models, they go for somewhere between 6.7 and 6.9 inches in terms of screen. This is 6.56, which makes it sit somewhere between the base Galaxy S21 and the Galaxy S21 Plus in terms of footprint. The camera module does protrude on the back, but it's a really grippable size. Number 9. Every phone has customization, but I don't think I've ever seen this extent of control over core system animations. I think it will surprise you. So for starters, you've got an ambient light around the edges of the screen, and this can be configured into all sorts of shapes and sizes depending on whether you're receiving a call, listening to music, getting a notification, etc. You've got 6 different icons for your in-display fingerprint scanner, but get this, those can be mixed and matched with 8 different animations for the scanner, and then 6 more animations for the facial recognition. So without even touching the wallpaper, you have like 300 different visual combinations for your lock screen. Oh yeah, and you can change the charging animation, the USB insertion animation, scanner. But get this, those can be mixed and matched with 8 different animations for the scanner, and then 6 more animations for the facial recognition. So without even touching the wallpaper, you have like 300 different visual combinations for your lock screen. Oh yeah, and you can change the charging animation, the USB insertion animation, and even in what way the screen will turn off when you hit the standby button. These are such easy features to implement. I don't know why more companies don't do them. Anyways, as you can probably tell by the dimensions of the thing, cameras are a very important part of this phone's DNA. And so, before we get into the meat of it... Is that even... And so, before we get into the meat of it... Is that even meat? Before we get into the meat of it...
Со мной происходит что-то странное. Каждый раз, когда я спускаюсь по лестнице, я начинаю танцевать, причем в замедлении. Неужели все дело в том, что я герой?
Number 8 is the zoom. Now, I'm not really a huge zoom person, but it's surprisingly good, given that it's not meant to be one of the phone's selling points. Like up until you get to 10 times zoom, so 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, 8 times, it is at least as good as the Galaxy S21 Ultra. And then after 10 times it falls behind, but not really by as much as you might think. But then we get to the main camera. Long story short, it's an enormous sensor, like bigger than that of a Galaxy S21 Ultra, paired with the widest aperture that I've seen on a phone in the last 2 years, at f1.57. And there's a very distinct result you get from credentials like this. The Vivo X60 Pro Plus is a bokeh machine. Or in other words, photos have A, incredibly crisp foregrounds, and B, incredibly blurred backgrounds. For as long as I can remember, this is the closest a phone has gotten to taking photos that look DSLR-like. Except, unlike DSLRs, this has possibly the most aggressive HDR algorithm I've ever seen, if you're into that. It basically just incredibly blurred backgrounds. For as long as I can remember, this is the closest a phone has gotten to taking photos that look DSLR-like. Except, unlike DSLRs, this has possibly the most aggressive HDR algorithm I've ever seen, if you're into that. It basically just means you're quite unlikely to end up with overexposed skies, even if it can feel a little inorganic. So, lots of natural bokeh means that you should need to use portrait mode less. But number 6 is that if you do decide to use portrait mode, it's quite a lot of fun here. You get a bunch of different portrait modes. There's one called French Impressions that, I'm going to be honest, confuses me, but the majority do distinctly change the end image in a good way. It's even got night mode portraits, which uses the flash while capturing to keep faces bright. I'm going to be honest, confuses me, but the majority do distinctly change the end image in a good way. It's even got night mode portraits, which uses the flash while capturing to keep faces bright. But the signature one here is called Biotar. So, it's probably not a surprise to you that this phone is a partnership with Zeiss. You literally can't miss it. And Biotar is basically a lens design that Zeiss came up with. We're talking years ago, like 1920s. It then became a bit of a collector's item because it was it. Not surprised to you that this phone is a partnership with Zeiss. You literally can't miss it. And Biotar is basically a lens design that Zeiss came up with. We're talking years ago, like 1920s. It then became a bit of a collector's item because of the unique look it could create. They call it rotational bokeh. And so the idea of this portrait mode is that it recreates that lens. Plus, you can also refocus shots after you've taken them, which is always fun. But there's another feature linked to this whole Zeiss thing. Probably subtler, but I think the concept of it is cooler. Like, we all know at this point that just having a camera company's name slapped onto a phone doesn't make it good. But with this phone, Zeiss has used their own signature T-star glass on the lenses. And just having a camera company's name slapped onto a phone doesn't make it good. But with this phone, Zeiss has used their own signature T-star glass on the lenses. And that apparently eliminates internal reflections. The way they brand it is as making the glass completely invisible, and therefore apparently creating cleaner images. It's a pretty hard one for me to test though. I can't exactly scratch it off and then do a before and after, but you can kind of see it in action if you point this phone at a bright light source. You can tell that the lens isn't fighting as much with the light by how there's much less glow, or ghosting from it. And number 4, much with the light, in action if you point this phone at a bright light source. You can tell that the lens isn't fighting as much with the light by how there's much less glow, or ghosting from it. And number 4, the icing on the cake, I'm so sorry, is motion autofocus. So, it turns out this phone has motion autofocus. So, it turns out this phone has a full menu all about making sure it keeps focus on things. So, it can do eye autofocus, body autofocus, and even object autofocus. And with each one, it's just locking on a different thing and keeping focus on it wherever that thing goes. These are features that I've just got on my actual main Sony a7S III camera. But now we're into the top 3. First up is gimbal stabilization. So, you might remember last year's X50 Pro. This was basically the gimbal phone, because it was the first to have a camera that could not just physically move, but also rotate to counteract your hand movements. And in some situations you could really tell, but equally in a lot of them its footage didn't look distinctly different to, say, a Samsung, which already has good stabilization. This is different. They've not just improved the stabilization system by giving the camera an extra dimension in which it can compensate your movements with, but they've also moved it from the main camera to the ultra-wide camera, which, because it's more zoomed out, is naturally less prone to shaking anyways. And the implication of this is that in just about every single scenario, you can tell. I did do a couple of tests. This is a cinematic shot taken on both, and while they do both look good, you can feel the effect of the gimbal. This is me running. The Vivo is much more focused on the subject, although I could see some people preferring a more natural motion. And this is what happens when you move to lower light. This is like a best case scenario for the Vivo, where the electronic image stabilization on most phones just kind of falls apart. Number 2, you're either going to find this really surprising, or it's exactly what you expected. So, I mentioned earlier that this is a massive camera sensor paired with, I've literally got cat fur everywhere, paired with a wide aperture. Well, alongside bokeh, this kind of setup is also conducive to really bright night photos. Actually, probably the brightest nighttime photos I've ever seen on a phone, or any camera for that matter. To some extent it is stylistic. Like, I don't think the best night mode shots are necessarily the brightest, but this has the detail too. The first couple of times I took one, I had to genuinely take a moment, like, what? And there's a bit more to it. It's got different styles of night mode, and while some of them are just kind of flat filters, there are a few that make quite dramatic changes to the color profile. And I did eventually find a night where a few stars popped out. I'm talking Britain here, so I do literally mean a few stars. You can see the behind the scenes shot here, but it was enough to give me a chance to try the Astro mode. It's good. It's really quite good. Like, this is not a 100% like-for-like comparison, but for context, this is a tripod-enhanced night mode on the S21 Ultra, and this is the Astro mode on the X60. It's the most stars that I've ever seen from my back garden. So, while I was at it, I took another one, and yeah, you get the idea. But Here's the other thing.
Maratovich.
Because the ultra-wide camera is now the one to have the gimbal stabilization system on it, it can hold itself still for like 10 seconds at a time, meaning that this is also the brightest ultra-wide night mode I've seen. And speaking of things that are bright, if you are enjoying this video, then a sub to the channel would be illuminating. How it works. Anyways, number one. I did tell you that this phone is half camera. It's an extension of this night mode. Night mode panorama.